Hello, everybody, and welcome to it's not quite week zero yet. Well, it is actually week zero, but we're not talking about week zero yet today. It's the Pac 12 and kind of just West Coast um, P- um, LeanTossup podcast and college football podcast today. So we're going to talk about the Pac 12 and kind of the Mountain West and just kind of our thoughts on a lot of those teams going forward. And we're going to have another pod coming up soon to talk about week zero. But yeah, for now we're just going to talk. We're going to finish off the last of our conference team previews and move on to week zero later on the week. I am joined as always by my co-host BuckMetrics. How are you doing today? Or tonight, I should say.
I'm doing great. Since our last pod, I went to Las Vegas. I got my preseason bets down. I had some great Spanish food. If you follow me on Twitter, I had a very nice hit at the late pick four at Del Mar for
I
four
saw that.
digits, yeah, which paid for the trip and then some. Of course, I left some of that in other places in Vegas because that's kind of what you do there. Um, but yeah, good time, and we will reference that later in the podcast later this week.
For sure. So yeah, so all right, so the Pac-12. So the first one, obviously, the kind of the one I think everybody wants to hear us talk about, and probably the most I don't know, talked about team this season is for the Pac-12 obviously is USC. Now we're gonna punt on USC. Don't worry, we will talk about USC, but we're gonna put them in kind of a special podcast midweek. We're gonna talk about them there, give them a lot more time than just kind of our normal team previews. Which honestly, we actually talk a lot about some of these teams. So, but we're gonna give them their own special time for talk about USC when we talk about week zero because there's like six games, and even then, half of them are functionally unwatchable. So we'll talk about USC more later on this week. So let's kind of talk. Let's look at a good team in the Pac-12, Utah. So this is a team. Obviously, they won the Pac-12 last year. They almost beat Ohio State in the Rose Bowl. Just an amazing game that was. Just a crazy super high scoring game. Um, Probably one of the best Rose Bowls I've ever seen, to be honest. And then even then, that was with Ohio State losing Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave to the draft. They opted out of the game because of the draft. I mean, just just a great and Utah's a really good program, right? I mean, right now, if you're watching the NFL preseason, you've seen Tyler Huntley do amazing at with Baltimore. He's been really good in the preseason, and that was the quarterback before the current quarterback at Utah, Cameron Rising, and honestly, he's also getting a lot of hype as well. So there's a lot to talk about with this Utah program. Like there's a reason why when there's conversations about expansion from either the Big Ten or the Big 12 or the SEC or the Big Ten, Utah is mentioned a lot on that. Like people don't want to leave Utah at the bottom of the pile anymore. They used to be like a long time ago. Well, I mean not that long ago. It was about 10 years ago. But people really didn't talk that much about Utah. But not anymore. Now Utah is in a lot of these conversations, and people are like, yeah, don't forget about this Utah team. Um, they did have a bit of a slow start last year. But I actually like that towards the end of the year they really came on strong, and they actually proved my model wrong a lot. My model really liked Oregon against them, but they crushed Oregon soundly both times, just debilitating destruction against the Ducks. And yeah, I think this is actually a really solid team, and I think they could have a really good season this year. What are your thoughts on them?
Yeah, I agree. You mentioned that 10 years ago they weren't getting a lot of talk. I mean, they were getting talk only because they were transitioning into the Pac-12. And although in their first game ever in the Pac-12, they almost beat USC. I don't know if you remember that crazy it was at the Coliseum. It was a blocked field goal that they had to win the game, and USC returned it for a touchdown to as time expired to cover and then not cover and then cover because there was some craziness about whether it counted or not. I think folks like you and I remember that more than the average bear, but that was it was a really cool beginning, and then it just was been a long, slow build since. But man, Kyle Whittingham has just really, really done a good job of just being patient and just adding literally a brick by brick project in getting Utah to where it is now. Last season, I had them as the second best offense in the Pac-10, which you usually don't say about a Utah team. They had the best defense, which is not unusual, and I had them top overall. Like you said, they did start slow last year. They started 1-2, and the only win was over Weber State. And then in Game 4, they actually had a really close win over Washington State. And then after that, they just totally, turned it around. I think part of that was ditching Charlie Brewer, who's now going to ruin Liberty's season, but good for them. They went with Cam Rising, which I thought was interesting that they didn't at first. I don't know why. I think it was a bad decision. Um, but clearly, they wound up in the right spot. If you saw Rising, he played a bit against USC in the COVID season, and he scared the death out of me. So going by the game theory, what does your opponent not want you to do? Yeah, Cam Rising scared me. So they landed on the right spot eventually. Last year, Cam Rising, his QB plus was 112 in 11 starts. That speaks to being more efficient than explosive. But if you kind of segment it out, after the Washington State game, it was actually 121, which is, more of that high scoring Utah team that we saw later in the year. So they're in a good spot where, they're set at quarterback for a while, and he's not just settled, but he's actually very good by Utah standards. Their O line will be okay. They have enough returning start where I don't think there's going to be huge transitions. Defense also has a decent returning talent metric and improvement metric. Now they do lose some really talented guys, but I think if at this point, if you think that Kyle Whittingham cannot develop talent on the defensive end, you're not paying attention. So I think they are going to have a quicker start than usual. They've tended to start a little slowly from season to season. I think that's not going to be the case this year because everything's really settled. Um, the the total on their Pac-12 wins was 6.5 at the Rampart Casino. Um, I think that's really low. This team really does not really have a lot of stupid losses on its resume as a program. I see them being favored or eight or nine. Now that doesn't mean they're going to win them all, but that's a pretty big delta between being favored 8 or 9 and a total of 6.5. The one I think that's going to be a little tricky is when they're at Oregon late in the season. We'll get to them later. I'm not the biggest believer in them, so I definitely grabbed the over when I was in Vegas last week. I'm kind of curious if you think they're going to be favored in all their conference games. Do you see them? I mean, do you see anyone besides maybe Oregon where they wouldn't be favored?
Well, this is going to be another example of a team where it's like it's going to be completely dependent on how they start the season, right? Like
Hmm.
if cause I mean actually, so in this I was actually just looking at this number while you're talking, Utah versus Florida, right? So I think when we started these pods, I think Utah was like a 1 point favorite. It's up to
Hmm.
Utah's up to -2.5. Now not a huge line movement, obviously. The movement between 1 and 2.5 is very small. Again, a field goal is a field goal, right? So not a ton. Florida's plus 120 on the money line, at least on my book that I'm looking at right now. But the thing of it is, like, if Utah were to lose to Florida, then yeah, I could see a lot of those moving. Right? I could see a lot of those flipping. And the interesting thing, though, is, like, we talked about Florida already. The books have hated Florida. Like they
Hmm.
literally like their season win total is low. Their odds to win the SEC are really low. I mean, we saw that look ahead line against they're like 2 point dogs against a Florida State team that we think is horrible, and they're only 2.5. They're now 2.5 point dogs at home against Utah. Like, do they think that like Utah's gonna be severely jet lagged? I mean, Utah to Florida isn't fun, but it's not death. Like they're not playing this game in Europe or something. Like I like it's that's a weird line, and maybe the books don't believe in Utah, right? Like Utah is a team that I could see like they could lose to Florida, but then Florida's like actually secretly good, and then Utah's also secretly good, but people don't realize it, and then you get a ton of like Utah plus 3.5, Utah plus 4, like there may be like 6.5 point dogs to a decent Oregon team, and then they just destroy Oregon, right? Like this is the
Hmm.
thing. So Utah could definitely be a team where, like, if they lose a couple of games early, then all of a sudden you just get tremendous value on them when they can just start obliterating teams, and you're getting them at like -2.5, +3, +3.5, right? Like, so Utah, like, I like the over 6.5. This is just a good, consistent program, and the Pac, which is something the Pac-12 is definitely devoid of. There are not a lot of consistently good teams in the Pac-12. It's actually funny when you when you started talking there, Freudian slip there. You said the Pac-10, which to be fair, it
Oh
kind of
yeah.
is the
Well, it
Pac-10.
is.
So
Yeah.
it's yeah, it's not wrong. Um, but no, that's the thing. It's yeah, I actually do really like. I like Utah over 6.5 games. I actually like that a lot. But that being said, I'm probably also going to take Florida week 1. So let's see how I want. Let's see if that line gets to a 3, and I'll take Florida. But yeah, Utah, good team. UCLA. So this is another interesting team. Chip Kelly, of course. This is his team. Um, Dorian Thompson Robinson, obviously their quarterback last year. He like again, they had a very up and down season. Calling it up and down season is saying is putting it very lightly. Um, like there were some insanely high highs and obscenely low lows. I think they beat LSU. If I'm not, yeah, they beat LSU. I remember. I think I bet on them to beat LSU, or I wanted to. I forgot to put that bet in, but no, I they beat LSU. Like they had some really well, and LSU sucked though, right? So, but no, like they had some amazing highs last year, and like I like the question now is again, and we actually saw this last year, right? When Oklahoma and Texas announced that they were leaving the Big 12 to go to the SEC, both of them had pretty down years, right? And we saw there's the factor of like the entire conference hates you, right? Because like for Texas and Oklahoma, it was pretty clear that Texas did this, and they just kind of dragged Oklahoma along with them. This is the other one, right? So USC very clearly instigated the moving to the Big Ten, and they kind of definitely dragged UCLA along with them. Now, actually, there's some interesting intrigue on this because apparently, some board in California is the only thing that actually has any control over college football. Because apparently, somehow they can stop UCLA going to the Big Ten. Not like not whoever runs the NCAA. No. It's some random school board in California. But no, so there's some intrigue on that. But no, I think they're gonna have a target on their back, right? I mean, USC is gonna be a good team, right? Like last year with Texas, they were rebuilding. They're still definitely rebuilding in some cases. I mean, there's some been Texas news. We can talk about more about Texas probably when we get to week 1 lines, but no, like I could see this UCLA team having a massive target on their back, and I don't like they're not going to be able to touch USC because they're going to have like USC is going to have like Caleb Williams and Jordan Addison, and they're significantly better, and I think they're going to be able to crush a lot of these lower tier Pac-12 teams, but I think they're going to come gunning for UCLA. Is that kind of is that your assessment of this season for them as well, or do you kind of see them as like a dark horse here?
It's interesting. I know this isn't the USC pod's going to be later. But kind of really quick, USC is basically just kind of taken over what Chip Kelly had and said, we're going to do it better. We're just, they have better skill. They have better quarterback. They both have crummy defenses, and they're probably not going to be that physical, either of them. But USC is just going to do it, I think, at a better level. For this season, I see them completely as a wild card. What's weird is, Andy Staples in a recent column, somebody wrote in and said, "Hey, what's the one team from each conference that is unranked at the beginning of the season and make the playoff?" And I kind of thought UCLA is that team here. Now, are they the most likely? No, but I think of the unranked, they've got a path where things can fall into place and they could make it. They're plus 825 to win the conference, which isn't the craziest thing. I'm not going to bet it, but there's far worse bets I've seen and made in my life. Um, their offense actually, I had them as top in the Pac-12 last year, rated at a 7.0, and that would have made them 14th nationally, which is probably a little higher than people would think. But their offense was legitimately good. The thing I want to see is, okay, if it takes you 4 seasons in your offensive guide, it takes you 4 seasons to have an offense that's decent. Is that a proof of concept for Chip Kelly at UCLA? Or is that just kind of like, a high tide that every team experiences every once in a while? Even a bad coach, stumbles into something good once every 4 years. So, longer term, I'm gonna see kind of how that shakes out. They do have the top returning quarterback in the Pac-12. I have Caleb Williams ranked higher, but of the returning quarterbacks, DTR is the highest at QB plus of 127. Their improvement metric on the offensive line is fine, so they should be okay there. They do lose a couple of I know they lose Zach Charbonnet, but I don't know. We'll just see how that plays out with Chip Kelly. You just don't know what he's going to plug in, if it'll work or not. Basically, from what we've seen at UCLA, the questions to me are really on the defensive side of the ball. The new defensive coordinator, he's been a position coach for a long, long time, so we don't know what he's going to bring. He does replace an objectively horrible defensive coordinator in Jerry Azzinaro, who I think every UCLA fan was delighted to see leave. They have a very, very low metrics in terms of the returning experience and the improvement metric. I don't know if they ran off a bunch of kids or they just graduated, but they have actually, this is crazy. They have 6 defensive starters that are projected that are actually transfers in from another program from last year. Um, Here's where it gets a little tricky. Of those 6, 2 are from North Texas. One is from Duke, one is from Hawaii, one is from Wyoming, and one is from Alabama. Aside from Alabama, those really aren't Pac-12 caliber programs. So I'm not sure what they're going to get with kids coming in from all these different programs that are definitely a step below, the Pac-12. So you've got all these new guys from all over, typically lower level programs. You've got a new DC who's definitely better than his predecessor. So the defense, could it be an absolute disaster? Yeah. Could it be a runaway success? Possibly. Could it be something in between? Absolutely. So we don't know what that's going to be. So I can't really predict their number of wins. Their total was 8.5. I think it was juiced weighted the under. Um, I can't play it. They're an interesting team to watch. And the other thing is that 8.5 really is some sticker shock, but look at their non-conference games. They're really, really just weak. Bowling Green, Alabama State, and my beloved Jaguars of South Alabama all at home. I mean, there's no way they start the season anything but 3-0. Then they're at Colorado, which is not the trickiest road game in the world. So you're looking at almost certainly at 4-0. And then you're just looking at, geez, can they go, 4-3 the rest of the way? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. Going to be an interesting team to watch, and there's a path there for them to actually, go a long ways.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? With this team, and it's the variability, right? And the question is, and we see this a lot in a lot of different sports. I obviously on LeanTossup here, if you're followers of us, we do Call of Duty, and there's some teams in Call of Duty that are also extremely high variance. And it's like sometimes sometimes they go out there and they can beat the best team in the league, and some days they get out there and they can lose to the worst team in the league, right? And yeah, it's concerning. And the problem is like, are you gonna bet on Chip Kelly having like a perfect season? And honestly, he's never had like a perfect season, right? And I mean, they can still be good. I mean, obviously they're gonna be a good team at niche spots and stuff. But yeah, like I agree with you. Like 825 to win the conference isn't bad, but that's a really like it's a high number, but it's deservedly so, right? Because they could start out 5-0 and then lose like 3 straight games, and then they're done. Then there's no hope of them winning the conference, right? So
Yes.
and like it'll be the most randomest teams. Like it'll be like, oh no, they tripped over Colorado or something, or like that's the thing. So yeah, not fun.
One
Um,
other thing about them, real quick, and people, I noticed this because I'm a USC guy, and I'm in the same media market as UCLA. One thing to keep an eye on is that historically they do much better until classes start. Classes start the very end of September or early October there, and they just turn into a totally different team once classes start. So keep an eye out for that. Starting with the September 30th game.
that's an interesting point. So this is completely different for me. So classes don't start at when the football season starts.
Yeah, well, it depends on the school. If you're on a semester system, classes are going to start like late August or early September. If you're on a quarter system, so they have one quarter in the fall and then a winter and a spring. So they're each 10 weeks. So the quarter schools actually start, late September, early October.
Okay, that's huh. See, in Canada, every school just has 3 semesters. That's it. So like when everybody comes back in school starts, it's school starts. We actually definitely start later than you. Like even our like for Canada versus the U.S., all of our school starts later than you, but we go later than you too, though. So
Hmm.
all of our I think, yeah, university, high schools, elementary schools, we all start after Labor Day. But then you guys are pretty much done by the end of May, right? Like you guys don't have much school in June. We go to the almost the end of June. So that's that. Like it's a small difference, but yeah, that's crazy. The different. But I guess yeah, that would education would be fundamentally like determined by the state, right? It wouldn't be determined by the federal government.
Yep, yep, the
Federal government
state
doesn't do anything in
or
the
whatever
states.
the
So
school says if they're private.
yeah, that's the thing. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, they could probably just decide to do whatever they want. But yeah, that's an interesting tidbit about that. Yeah, so because the thing is that it always does that's a good point, right? Because they always seem like they're doing so good, doing so good, and they get like slammed with like midterms and stuff, and they're like, oh no, we gotta study. Uh, yeah. All right, moving on. Another team in the Pac-12 that pretty much always disappoints as well, Oregon. Um, so this is obviously we talked a bit about Oregon before, and they lost their head coach Mario Cristobal, went to Miami. So they got a new head coach, brought him from Georgia. Now, generally, of course, when you get a coordinator from another school, not the coach, not the head coach, obviously, but when you get an offensive or defensive coordinator, obviously some concerns. I usually have concerns about that as well. But at the same time, I don't think it like because it's Georgia's defensive coordinator and because their defense was so good, possibly one of the best defenses ever in the history of college football. I'm significantly less concerned. So I like obviously there's always concerns about like oh maybe the like you can maybe be concerned about um returning like you can be concerned about like a step up, right? Like just college football is littered of like, oh, here's like a really good hotshot coordinator, and then they become a head coach, and then they're horrible, right? There's so many of them. But I think that because he coached that defense and it was so good, I think he can actually do pretty well here. And Oregon's always been deep; they've just never really been able to put it together. And there's always been that game when they just randomly lose, and they shouldn't lose a game. It's a game they shouldn't lose, but they end up losing it, and that's the thing. So yeah, I'm a little high on this team. They do have Bo Nix. They got Bo Nix as a transfer from Auburn because they lost Anthony Brown. Now, Anthony Brown was not great last year at all, but now he's a quarterback for the Ravens, and in the preseason he's been doing pretty well. So, which again, it's just hilarious that apparently they just pick up random quarterbacks and they just do amazingly at Baltimore. Um, but no, I don't hate this. I don't hate this team this year. I kind of like them against Georgia week 1, the 17 and a half. Um, but I don't know. It's gonna be weird. Like I could see like Oregon winning that game outright or losing by 30. And I just don't know what's more likely. I kind of think the losing by 30 is less likely, but I don't know. Like I kind of think Oregon can cover a spread against Georgia, but I don't know. What do you think about this? Do you kind of I mean, I don't think that the variance of Bo Nix at this point is that horrible, to be honest.
Wow. I admire your optimism. I'll just say that to start with. Um, I am much less a believer in this program than you are at this time. You've got a first time head coach at a major Power Five program, which I'm not really a fan of. To your point, did he do a great job at Georgia? Yeah. Do we know how much of that was him versus Kirby? I don't know. Kind of reminds me of how the Ravens had all these defensive coordinators that just in a succession all did a good job, and then they went on to be kind of whatever as head coaches. Could be that. I don't know. We'll see. But there might be a parallel there. I'm curious to see if a new first-time head coach can shed the costume of stupid that Mario had this program, wearing a few times a year, or if he's just going to put on a different costume of stupid being a first-time head coach. And why do I say that? Um, he's a first-time head coach, and his OC has only 4 seasons as an offensive coordinator, and apparently he wasn't really calling plays before. He didn't exactly do great work with Jordan Travis at Florida State. His defensive coordinator is Tosh Lapoy, who had one year as I'll put it in quotation marks as defensive coordinator at Alabama in 2018. I think like after 3 games he got the play calling ripped from him because he didn't understand what was going on. Their offensive line coach is Adrian Clem, who's pretty much not a good offensive line coach. If you ask any fan of a team that's had him there, it just really seems that he's going for recruiting prowess over development. All those guys that I mentioned are really good recruiters. Um, so just larger picture, I'm skeptical. We go to the offense. You lose an elite offensive coordinator in Joe Moorhead. That has to hurt. Um, Bo Nix, he's topped out with a QB plus of 99. Career he's been 85, 82, and 99. And that first year, his offensive coordinator was Kenny Dillingham. So I don't know. That there's a lot of question marks on the offensive side of the ball. Where they are solid on the offensive side of the ball is their offensive line. They have like the highest possible improvement metric from last year, and they return pretty much everybody. So they were young, and they were good last season on the offensive line. Now the problem is how much do they suffer from losing not just a Mario, who was an offensive lineman, has done well with offensive lines wherever, but Alex Mirabal too, and they replace him with this goofball Clem. Um, Usually that takes more than a year. Offensive linemen, there's the degradation when you go from good coach to bad coach usually happens over a couple years, so they should be okay there. So if the offensive coordinator Dillingham knows what he wants to do, and if Bo Nix is actually up to it, the offensive line will make it much easier. Now, the problem is those are a couple of really big ifs if I'm looking at it objectively. Um, the defense, actually, I'm surprised. They were only sixth in the Pac 12 last season, which is really a crime considering how much talent was on that defense. So they should improve under Lanning. Um, I'm just wondering, when I just don't know how much they're going to get from their actual coordinator, Lapoy, outside of the defensive line, which is really his specialty. Um, but they should improve on the defensive side of the ball. One of the problems that I also see too is I have them with almost 2.5 games of good luck last year, and K Ford shows them regressing by 1.5 wins. So there's two data points that say coming off a 10-2, let's just take almost 2 wins off that at front. Um, their total is 8.5 wins. I actually pushed people out of line to get to the under on that in Vegas. I like that. They've got some sneaky, interesting games. On week 3, they're hosting BYU. And what's interesting about that is, we're not going to BYU. BYU is going to improve a lot on defense, and BYU is only getting 6 against Notre Dame in Las Vegas. And I've had some question marks about Notre Dame, but they're pretty unquestionably a top 8 team right now. So I'm going to use that to inform that could be a really tough game for Oregon. If you've got a good defense against Bo Nix, I've seen that before, and it usually doesn't go well. Um, September 24th at Washington State. We'll get to them in a little bit. Jake Dickert has been a defensive coordinator, and I think that he again might have something for Bo Nix just to kind of trip him up. And then Arizona, I think Arizona, we'll get to them too later. I think they're on the upward trajectory, and this strikes me as one of those ready to strike teams hosting a soft target. So there's 3 really interesting games there over a period of 4 weeks.
Yeah, that BYU game actually will be pretty interesting. BYU, like, they play the cool, like, they have like the weirdest schedules, like, but like they always end up playing, like, they'll go like, oh cool, we're gonna play New Mexico State this week, and then we're gonna play ND the next week. Like, it's the most up and down schedule.
Yeah.
But it's always an interesting moment though. Like, never a dull, like, well, some weeks are dull, but then never a dull 2 weeks. Like, they'll be like, oh, we're gonna play like Vanderbilt, but next we're gonna play Baylor. Be like, all right, it's the life of the independent. But next year they go to a conference. I think we're gonna see less of their like random Oregon games. But yeah, I, BYU is another interesting team. But yeah, no, I'll stick with the Ducks a little bit at least. I kind of 8-5, 8.5 wins. That under does kind of seem a little nice, but at the same time, like, when the Ducks are underdogs, that's when you should bet on them, and they usually do well as underdogs. That's kind of why I like the 17.5. But we'll have to see. I don't know exactly how well Bo Nix and new completely new coaching staff basically will translate to Oregon.
Or so Oregon and Florida are the two that we have the biggest difference of opinion so far. I think, right?
I think so, and those also happen to be kind of my two teams that I kind of like. So that's
Yep.
the thing. So um, I wonder why. No, I mean to be fair though, like there are teams I follow pretty closely, and they usually do like people usually like especially Florida. People usually do underrate Florida, and like Florida's never that bad, never as bad as people think they are. Same kind of as Oregon too. So it's kind of interesting. I kind of like them because they're usually underrated, um, but we'll see. I mean, we're getting two good tests, right? If Utah destroys Florida, and if Georgia beats, if they both win and cover, then those seasons could be we could be talking about a lot different in terms of Florida and Oregon. Um, Washington State. So this is actually a team I really liked down the stretch last year. I bet on them as underdogs in the Apple Bowl, which is the game between Washington State. And I love this team down the stretch. They like my mom suddenly really started liking them down the stretch, and they definitely kept cashing spreads and stuff. So I really like that. Um, this but they also lost their head coach. If I remember correctly, it was because of a COVID mandate, if I'm not mistaken. Basically, they're like, yeah, no, you can't work here anymore because you're not getting vaccinated. And he's like, okay, cool, I'm out. And then I think he took a bunch of the coaching staff with them too, and then they were just in really bad shape. And then they definitely turned it around, and for um, they fought for themselves. I This team was good, and I don't think this team is going to completely regress. I think this team could actually be half decent this year. Um, and I kind of like them, and this is definitely I'm gonna wait and see how my model likes them this year, but I think this is definitely a team I could play in random spots. What do you think about them? Do you kind of agree that this is kind of an overlooked team, or do you think that this is they're getting the proper amount of because like again like when you look at it on paper, right, and we'll talk about Washington probably next. Both these teams fired their head coaches last year. Both these are rivals. They're both in the state of Washington, but like I feel like much more attention is being paid to Washington rather than being paid to Washington State, and I feel like that's kind of unfair. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I'm if you're when you run your simulation on them, I'm curious how it's going to go with their quarterback because he was at the Incarnate Word last season. So good luck trying to normalize FCS for FBS. Um, like you said, first time head coach. Um, didn't really bring in a super experienced staff like anybody that'd been a head coach before. But whatever, it's Washington State. They're not a rich program that could probably afford to do better. Probably because again they're going to be litigated to hell. Rolovich is suing them over his dismissal, so good luck with that. They were actually one of only four Pac-12 teams that I actually had a positive rating above average both offense and defense, which is interesting to to their point. They did get overlooked last season. Um, they're kind of doing a the second version of the gag that Western Kentucky ran last season. Go to the FCS, get a dynamic offense, get their offensive coordinator and their quarterback. The offensive coordinator was from Incarnate Word also. They were fourth in the FCS in scoring last season. Cam Ward, what's interesting is, I ran my QB plus calculation for him, and it's apples to oranges because he's an FCS. His QB plus is 105 and 113. But what's interesting is he threw for 45 attempts a game, and the FBS average is 31. So not having seen it down, that sounds a lot like Mike Leach, kind of just throw a lot and throw it short and throw more. Mike Leach's quarterbacks always kind of make light bend when it comes to QB plus with his quarterbacks because they throw for so many short completions. What's going to be interesting to see is can the transition here be as quick as it was at Western Kentucky? It's a different ball game, I think. Conference USA is, I think, probably the weakest of all the conferences right now, and it's different doing it versus the Pac-12 level of athletes. So there's some question marks there, but there is some upside. Defensively, I actually had them ranked 32nd in the whole country. So again, I think this got overlooked. They brought in the defensive coordinator from Nevada, which I really like. We'll talk about Nevada later. I love Jay Norvell, and I think if you can get a defensive coordinator that coached under him, Nevada had a good defense. I think you've made a really smart hire. Um, you know, they have zero buzz. Phil Steele actually has them finishing last in the North, which is surprising to me. Vegas has the total for their wins in this season at 5.5, and they're probably going to start 3-2. They should beat Idaho. They should beat Colorado State at home. Even though I love Jay Norvell, that's just kind of a little bit of a transition there, and they should beat Cal at home too. Um, I'm very interested to see their games on September 10th and September 24th at Wisconsin and hosting Oregon. And that's really because you've got Dickert, who is a former defensive coordinator, and you've got a good defensive coordinator coming in from Nevada, going against two very susceptible quarterbacks in Graham Mertz and Bo Nix. Um, so I think they start 3-2 with maybe an outside shot at 4-1. Then that 5.5 comes doable. I didn't bet it, but this is gonna be an interesting team to watch just for that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Um, yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? I mean, you see some of these guys come up from the FBS. Sometimes it's not good, right? Sometimes just the step up is like I know. I mean, I'm looking at the NFL level, right? Obviously, you have Ben DiNucci, who was the quarterback for. He was James Madison. He's like the back. He's one of the backup quarterbacks. Well, he's gotten some preseason playing time with the Dallas Cowboys, and he's just really bad. They keep him around because I think he knows, or a friend of his has a is close to the head coach of the Cowboys, and it's just every time he plays, it's not particularly good. But again, that's the thing with the FCS quarterbacks. But at the same time, Trey Lance, also an FCS quarterback, he is now being named the starter for the San Francisco 49ers, right? At a certain point, like, okay, there's a lot of question marks about Trey Lance, 100%. But at a certain point, if you're named starter of an NFL team, you have to meet a certain threshold, right? Like, you can't be horrible. Like, if you're really that bad, then you will not, like, and that's the thing. So I think it's hit and miss. I think obviously sometimes people get, sometimes, like, just because they're in the FCS doesn't mean they're bad, right? I mean, sometimes these people get missed, right? Sometimes people get put in the FBS who shouldn't be in the FBS. And same as the FCS, right? So it's an interesting thing to watch. I'm gonna pay attention to this team. I'm starting to like this team, honestly. And
Yeah,
yeah,
one
I
thing
mean,
too about that move up. What's interesting too is um, Cam Ward was the quarterback was no cinch to go to Washington State. Actually, Lane Kiffin was recruiting him to Ole Miss for a while before Jackson Dart landed there. Kind of interesting.
mhm, yeah, that's actually kind of interesting. So yeah, maybe this is a really are we kind we're both kind of on this team. I'm actually I really like that over 6.5. Or would you say is it 6.5 or 5.5?
5.5, 5.5.
5.5. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
And again, they have Wisconsin. We don't like Wisconsin at all. So like that could be.
Well,
I don't. I think they probably have Wisconsin as. Are we gonna get like Wisconsin like minus? Like are we able to get like Washington State plus 10 against Wisconsin? Oh man.
I I think it's gonna be more than that. I would say it's gonna be closer to like 16.
Oh, oh man, I'm so excited for that. 9-10. That's wait. Is that week 2?
Is week 2? Yeah.
Oh, actually, that is okay. So I'll announce this on here. That's the day before my birthday, actually. So that's cool.
There you go.
So that's
I
cool.
think that is your birthday.
No, but yeah, no, no 9/11 is my birthday, September 11th. So that's the day before, because my birthday's first day of the NFL season. So it works out that way this year. But basically, yeah. So yeah, oh yeah, maybe my birthday comes early this year. So yeah, that's gonna
Yep.
be fun. All right. Next up, the other team we were talking, the other team from Washington. Um, yeah. So again, very similar kind of story to Washington State here. Lost their head coach. They didn't fire their head coach because he was anti-vaxxer. They fired their head coach because he was just bad. Um, so they got rid
Well,
of their head
he
coach.
punched a player too, which doesn't help. But
Yes, that also doesn't help. Um, so now they have yeah, you have here they have Michael Penix now, who had magic with that 1 year with Indiana in the 2020 season. He did get injured last year, but before he was injured, he did not look particularly good. So this isn't like we're getting the Michael Penix revival here. I Yeah, like I think a lot of people just are thinking this team is going to be good because of the name, right? And Washington is this team that's like they went to the college football playoff one time. right? And like they've been good one or two times, and then everybody's just like, "Oh man, this team's so good." And honestly, they're really not. In my opinion, usually Washington's like the paper tiger in the Pac-12. A lot of times people are like, "Oh, they're so good, they're so good," and then honestly, most of the time they kind of suck. Like they honestly, I've never seen them able to actually like meet any expectations that people have set for them before a season. And honestly, yeah, I'm gonna like again. Obviously, we'll see what the model says going into Thanksgiving. But if I had to bet right now on the Apple Cup, I'd probably take Washington State. Um, are you with me on that, or are you gonna kind of buy the early season hype on Washington here?
I boy, I've got to be neutral on the Apple Cup. Yet just because there's just I think so many unknowns here in Washington. I really really like the hire of DeBoer from Washington or yeah, from Fresno State. He was actually this is crazy when he coached at Sioux Falls, which I don't know what division it is, but it's pretty down far the list. But he was 67-3 as a head coach, which is nuts. That's like Lance Leipold kind of stuff. Um, he knows what he's doing. And it's really weird that he was on the same staff as Kane Womack at Indiana because you just see the same kind of impact, but on the offensive side of the ball. So he went to Indiana in 2019 and he increased their offensive rating by 7 points, which is pretty significant. He left in 2020, it dropped 3.6 points. Um, this, at that time, basically the improve in offensive rating coincided with the increase in passing yards by 50 per game, and as soon as he left, it dropped by 50 a game, which is interesting. So he goes to Fresno State in 2020 as head coach. His first season there, he increased the passing yards per game by 130 and pretty much on the same pace in 2021. So if he's going to improve this offense, I think he needs a quarterback to make it happen. Now, does he have that at Washington? Yeah, I can argue the both sides a couple ways. Yeah, it's the same quarterback that he had at Indiana in Michael Penix. No, Michael Penix isn't the same quarterback now. He's injury prone and he's just a little more broken down. Um, yes, Dylan Morris actually had a really good freshman season under John Donovan, who was horrible. No, because neither of them are Jake Hayner, which really hurts because they had Jake Hayner at one point. Now he's at Fresno State. And Jake Hayner was trying to transfer in, but somehow, kind of like the Canada UCLA calendar difference, there was some kind of weird difference in the academic calendars, and so he couldn't transfer in. Crazy. So I have no idea what to expect this season on offense. Long term, I think they're going to be very, very tough, but this is going to be a weird transition season. The defense was pretty good in 2021. It should be better with I think at least a better offensive coordinator and just a better guy calling the plays and keeping the offense on the field a little more. They're tough to project just because of all the unknowns at quarterback, but I think the defense positions them as one of those teams that can strike at a soft target.
Yeah, I mean, again, Washington might be a team that I might have to rebuild for a couple of years. Um, yeah, that's hilarious with Jake Hainer and being at Fresno State. The thing of it is, the question is like, are they gonna have like, are they like, will eventually like, could he actually be an NFL QB? Actually, that's probably a different. Actually, I think we're talking about the Mountain West in a bit, so we'll talk about that later then. But um, yeah, that's he like their quarterback is actually really good. Like that Fresno State team was actually pretty good last year. Um, but yeah, I this team might need a couple seasons to rebuild. I think like they're gonna need a replacement QB. Penix will not be the long term answer. Um, I think we're gonna. It might take them a little bit to get back to being the Washington we all expect from them. But yeah, it's an interesting one to project. I mean, here's the thing: this could go really well first year. This could go really poorly, right? So I I kind of lean towards more like poorly. Maybe this team is about 500. Um, but we'll have to see as we get more into the season. All right, moving on to Colorado. Um, I so this was a horror. This team was pretty bad last year. I thought this was a team I thought was going to fire their head coach. They didn't fire their head coach, did they? No,
No.
no. They probably should have. Um, but yeah, this is like just an amazing fall from grace for this team, right? I mean, this was a team that was in the Pac, not Pac-12, the Big 12, right? This was one of the bigger named schools, one of the bigger blue chip schools nationally. It was actually a really good program, and it's just we don't talk like there's nothing to say about this Colorado team, right? Like this is a team that is picked like is probably one of the worst teams in the Pac-12, and there's no. It seems like there's no hope for this team, right? I mean, this was a team that was a steal by the when the Pac-12 got them from the Big 12, and now I don't even know if the Big 12 would want them back. Um, yeah, it's just not good there at all.
Yeah, they've. It seems like every good player they had left. Um, Jarek Brassard's at Michigan State now. Their best wide receiver is Brendan Rice. He's at USC. Their best defensive back, I think it's Mekhi Blackman, is at USC. So I think pretty much all we need to cover about Colorado will be covered in the USC pod.
It's a scathing indictment of the Colorado program. If we're gonna talk about them, we'll talk enough about them when we talk about other schools. All right. So the last two kind of in the Pac-12 or soon to be Pac-10, Arizona schools. So these are they are two schools that are kind of on very different trajectories. On one hand, you've got Arizona, who was full of a lot of promise last year. They played a lot of close games, still lost them, but they were close though and entertaining. But they still lost them. Kind of like Arizona's kind of taking the Kansas path. Um, Arizona State, a team that had a lot of hype, and just could not for the life of them. Like some of those games were just agonizing. They lost a lot of games they should have won. Like I remember this Arizona team was so frustrating last year. Like there was times when I would have like Arizona minus like 3.5 or something, and they'd go into the half of like I remember one game in particular. I can't remember who they were playing, which again, sometimes Pac-12 or sometimes it's just a blur. But it was like they had like a 21 point lead at halftime, and it was like minus 3.5, and they blew it somehow. Like I don't even know how they did that. I'm still like, how did that even happen? It wasn't even a good team they played either. It was I like was it Oregon State or it was someone I don't even know. It was that's how bad it was. I don't remember the team they played. It was bad. It was really bad, and that was not the only time that happened too. They somehow lost the bowl to Wisconsin. I don't know how that happened either. Like it's not good. It's really not good. Um, but then on the flip side, Arizona, like they're kind of turning this around. What are your thoughts on this? Do you kind of agree with me that these are two teams kind of going opposite ways here? Again, somehow Arizona State still keeping their head coach. They've somehow not fired their head coach. So I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so they're what's interesting is their coach, his former agent is now his boss. So I think if Herm gets fired, so does his boss. I think it'll be a two for one deal. What's interesting too is, like you said, you've got two teams just on totally different trajectories. It's going to be interesting to see who finishes higher this year because Arizona State starting from a much higher spot. They were 8-4 in the regular season last year. Um, I had them second overall in the Pac-12 versus Arizona was 10th overall. But man, Arizona State just had a complete talent drain and a coaching staff drain. They lost their offensive coordinator. Forget where he went. The defensive coordinator, Antonio Pierce, is back in the NFL. Um, they lost their wide receiver coach. They lost their defensive backs coach. Um, they've just lost a lot because of that whole mess that they're in right now. Um, and I think they lost their tight end coach too. So, you know, they're kind of just starting over in a weird way. They had a downgrade in quarterback from Jaden Daniels to Emory Jones. When we talked about Florida, I mentioned that Emory Jones was by far the worst quarterback of the Dan Mullen era. I just got to kind of wonder if you can't really be good under Dan Mullen. What are you going to do under this kind of nondescript offensive coordinator that Arizona State has now? So they could fall real far real fast. Arizona basically spent years falling real hard real fast, and they didn't look like it, by the one loss record. They only lost won one game, but they actually they were much better, last year than the year before. Um, the kids really believed in Jed Fish. You could just see their body language. They never gave up. They played hard. They get a big upgrade at quarterback. last year they had Will Plummer, who had the worst QB plus of all the qualifiers last year at 52. They have Jaden Delora, who is a 104. Um, and he did that, playing behind Aiden O'Connell at Purdue. Or no, 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 sorry, I'm confusing that with somebody else. He did it at Washington State. It's kind of weird that he left. I think he'll be fine. The only thing I'm a little concerned about is how much is Brendan Carroll involved as an offensive coordinator. Fish, I think, calls the plays. Carroll is pretty much. I'll put this nicely. I wasn't really sad to see him leave USC with his dad. I don't think they lost anything in that regard, and I don't think anybody's really lost anything when Brandon Carroll left the program. They had a reasonably okay defense for how bad the team had been, and that's I think more a function of Don Brown, who they hired from Michigan when Jim Harbaugh let him go. Don Brown went to go coach at UMass, and they replaced him with Johnny Nansen, who has been an okay position coach in the Pac-12. I don't think anybody, but a few people probably think he's ready to be a defensive coordinator. So that could really bite them in the butt. They're upgrading at talent, quite a bit. Unfortunately, at the expense of coaching and development. Nansen's a great recruiter. Carroll is a very good recruiter as well. They're bringing a top 100 wide receiver recruit from Southern California. I can't say his last name, Tetaroa or something like that. And they also get Jacob Cowing from UTEP. I have him as basically the seventh top receiver last year in terms of yards above replacement. We'll just keep it at that. It's a pretty good metric about how valuable a wide receiver is, and he did that at UTEP. The other thing is they actually had bad luck of almost 2.5 games, and K Ford has the same with 2.5 more wins this season. So I think actually kind of somehow Arizona State might wind up with a better record, but I think Arizona wins the Territorial Cup.
Yeah, it's this Arizona team's going to be fun to root for, but this Arizona team has like mid-season firing of their head coach written all over it, right? And because there was problems with, I can't remember exactly what it was. There was allegations of like,
Having recruits on campus
yeah, something with
during COVID
NCAA
restrictions.
violations, yeah, and that's the thing. So yeah, this could go badly for like this is screams to me like, okay, this team is like, by week 4 they're packed up, and by week 5 their head coach is gone. So
It should go badly. Apparently, like some staffer got really upset, and he had receipts on everybody just with basically texts and emails saying to do this just in total contravention of the rules, and he turned that all over to the NCAA. That's why you got all these coaching these assistant coaches that are no longer with the program because they were guilty.
wow, that's so. I guess yeah, there's just a matter of time before the NCAA just kind of clamps down on them. So
Yeah.
all right, moving on to I guess two more teams in the Pac-12, Stanford and Cal. So both these teams had kind of really underwhelming seasons last year. Stanford like randomly they some one of their 3 wins was against Oregon somehow through I think a miracle. Um,
That'd be
Cal,
the miracle of Mario.
yeah, again, no idea how this happens, but every year it seems. This is why I'm bullish. I'm more bullish long term on Oregon now because like maybe without Mario Cristobal that won't happen. Like that loss against Stanford that's not supposed to happen won't happen this year, right? Like that's the thing. So we'll see. Um, but yeah, this is another. Stanford is a team that like they ran last year. They had a ridiculously hard schedule. I think they also have a pretty hard schedule this year as well too. I just don't know, like apparently people are also really high on their quarterback um with at Stanford's quarterback, which is weird because again like so we've had a couple of like randomly good quarterbacks from Stanford. Now we had Andrew Luck obviously. Yeah, he was Stanford, right? Yeah, I believe he was Stanford.
Hmm.
Then obviously we have Davis Mills, who is the starting quarterback for the Texans. He's not horrible. He's not
Yeah.
amazing, but he's an NFL starting quarterback. He's not bad. And now apparently now we're on the third one. That's like 3 in like a decade. That's I mean I don't even know if like I mean Alabama hasn't even, well I guess they have statistically, but like they're not that good though. Like there's a lot of schools haven't produced that high level of quarterbacks. So that's really not bad for Stanford. I think this is a program is going to kind of go through more of a rebuilding, but I could definitely see some positive regression for them this year. Cal again, this Cal team probably should have done better than their record suggested, but we'll it's I think they kind of got a couple of bad bounces in there. I remember a couple times I was on them and then they didn't do too well. Um, but I think a lot of the times it was close. Like I think it was like like it's plus 7.5, and then they lose like randomly like a last second touchdown against them for something. So I don't know. I think this is an interesting question as to which of these teams will kind of be better this year, and I don't really know. But like it wouldn't surprise me if Stanford was like 8 and 4 or something, and Cal was like 7 and what would it be 7 and 5.
5,
Yeah,
yeah.
that would they could both be kind of positive this year. Again, if they all play Colorado, then I think that's pretty good. What do you think about that?
Um, you know, I think in the end, actually, Cal probably finishes ahead of them. I really like David Shaw, especially since he, ended the Clay Helton era last year, thankfully. He's got 3 conference titles, and Justin Wilcox is 26 and 28 overall. So the nod goes to Shaw there. Those 3 conference titles are a little bit, while ago though. As much pub as Tanner McKee got last season, Cal picks up the quarterback from Purdue who played behind Aiden O'Connell, and actually Plummer had a higher QB plus. Maybe that's a function of having a really good head coach as it relates to quarterbacks in Brom. But it's an interesting point, and you wonder how good he'll be, now as the clear starter, not having to fight for his job. Um, so I think I might be the only one who says, I think maybe Cal has the advantage at quarterback. Offensive line, Stanford has a really good improvement metric, and Cal has a very low one. Um, this is what's interesting. Offensive coordinator Bill Musgrave, I didn't like that hire when Wilcox brought him in, but he actually got them to their highest yards per play that Wilcox has had since he's been at Cal. And you compare that to Tavita Pritchard, who is the jerk that beat USC in 2007, as 40-point underdogs, 42-point underdogs. In the 3 seasons before Pritchard came on as offensive coordinator, Stanford ran for 212 yards a game. Since then, they run for 108 per game, which is just, that's where Stanford lost, Stanford being Stanford. And I love Shaw, like I said, but he's just way too loyal to this, to Pritchard. They got to fix that. They got to move on. It's just not working. Cal starts, not surprisingly, Wilcox is an excellent defensive coach. They return less experience, but they start from a stronger position on defense. Their rating was a plus 4.1 on defense last year. Stanford was a minus 6.7, the only defense worse than USC in the Pac-12 last season. So I think Cal finishes ahead of Stanford this season.
That's a pretty bold take. But I think Cal is another one of my favorite teams. I love betting them against Washington every year because every year they're an underdog, and most of the time they win. Except last year, randomly they didn't win. Like I remember times when it was like, there's used like I used to not always stay up for Pac-12 After Dark, and usually Cal Cal Washington is Pac-12 After Dark. So like there's times I'm like I'd be like, okay, cool, place the bet on Cal. Wake up, cool. I just won, right? So, but yeah, yeah. Cal is. I mean, they could be really good though, but I just yeah. I mean, we'll have to see how Jack Plummer is. I'm not completely sure on him, but yeah. I mean, you raised an interesting point though about Stanford just not being Stanford anymore, and I think I mean, the question is, should Stanford go back to that, right? I mean, the whole thing is the Stanford of old was like, oh, here's a bunch of just giant offensive linemen and like a running back, and here you go. The question is that feasible in today's game, right? I mean, there's a lot more pass heavy, a lot more like just there's a lot more just stuff in the game now. I don't know if necessarily just being a run heavy team or like just better army is the best option here. I don't know.
Yeah, one point on that. I think that when you're and this is a really weird analog that most people will probably say, "What are you talking about?" But if you're in a place like Kansas, where it's by far the hardest place to recruit in your conference, you've got to do something different. You can't do the same thing as everybody else and just try to do it better because you're never going to succeed that way. You've got to do a different thing and just execute it very well. Um, so I think if Stanford just tries to play the same kind of ball as everybody else, they won't do it because they just can't bring the same kind of athlete as everybody else. I think you've got to have that, zag against the zig of the conference. I think that's why that worked because, they were by far the most physical dominant team. As they've kind of gotten away from running the ball, they've just kind of disappeared into just being just a whatever program.
It's an interesting thought, and I mean it's very possible, right? I mean we can. That I mean, if you have a lot of pass happy teams in the Pac-12, right? I mean, USC obviously has been a very strong offensive team. If you have a team that's just going to grind you down offensively, there is some utility to that. But I don't know. I get that it's like this is history. This is how USC Stanford's always been. But I don't know. Maybe times are changing. I think I'm more open to Stanford becoming a different kind of a more traditional team than just a run first team. But anyways, so moving on to the Mountain West here. So Utah State is obviously the defending champions for the Mountain West. This was a team that kind of came out of nowhere last season. They were kind of good before, but then I don't think anybody particularly expected them to win the Mountain West. Um, what do you think about this team this year? Do you think they could repeat, or do you think this is kind of a more regression year to them? Maybe someone else has a better shot at it this year than them.
Yeah, I think there's a huge regression coming up, and I like Blake Anderson as a coach. He did a very overlooked job at Arkansas State. Overall in his career, he's 62 and 40. If you don't know the story, it's really sad. His wife was dealing with cancer for a few years. So, and it suffered, it showed itself in his performance, understandably. So if you take out the time that he was dealing with that, his career record's 35 and 18, which is, really good. Excuse me. Um, he brought over Logan Bonner, who was a very good quarterback for him at Arkansas State. And he, had a 120 QB plus, which is, very good. Bonner's back for another season. The thing that's crazy and why I think there's going to be regression is I actually had them as a fifth best team in their division, ahead only of New Mexico. I think that they were super lucky. And, I calculated out to 2.8 games of good luck last season. K Ford is showing regression of 2.5 wins. So we're in line with that they are coming back. And that lines up with, they were 9-3 in the regular season in 2021, and Vegas has their season win total at 6.5. They're the defending champs, so they, get mentioned first here. But I think that 6.5 sounds very reasonable.
Yeah, that is kind of weird. A team that went 9-3 last year, right? They were the conference champion last year. They're defending conference champion this year. They're like, yeah, 6.5. It's a little. That's not the greatest sign. I'm not the. That's not the most confidence filled sign. Boise State, our favorite team on blue turf. Well, I guess maybe Coastal Carolina. They're on, but it's teal turf. That's not technically not blue. Um, yeah, this team was like kind of up and down last year. They had a couple of good games, but then at times they really couldn't. They couldn't close the deal against a lot of kind of worse teams they probably should have beaten. Um, I don't think this team has gotten back to their past heights. I mean, this used to be kind of one of the go-to teams in the Mountain West, right? I mean, we all remember those Boise State seasons, the time they took on Oklahoma, like that. That was a long time ago. This is a fundamentally different program. I think they've definitely take they're good. They're not bad, but they've definitely taken a step back. I think. What
Yeah.
you kind of agree with that? I believe.
Yeah, I hate to say after one season, it's been an irreparable step back, but it's very, very discouraging what we saw. Andy Lavalos, first time head coach. I don't like that move at Power Five jobs, and since this is kind of the premier G5 job, unless you live in Orlando and you're one of those delusional UCF fans, this is the premier, or maybe was the premier G5 job. So I'd prefer they had hired somebody a little more proven. Instead, they get somebody who knows Boise State. He was the defensive coordinator before he went to Oregon. So first time head coach, he goes there and he guides them to their worst season since 1998. This program had won the division 5 of the prior 7 seasons, and he takes them to third place in the Mountain Division. Um, you kind of hear the narrative from the lazy national reporters saying, "Well, he needs time to implement his system." Well, what does that mean? I mean, this is a winning program. You're going to bring a guy who's never been a head coach before to reinvent your winning culture that spanned many coaches, not just one. I mean, I love to rip on Brian Harsin, but the man had great success at Boise. Chris Peterson had great success at Boise. His predecessor, I think, was it Cutter? Also had great success as well. So I don't know kind of what the move is now for them. You're not going to fire Avalos already. I'm probably the first to say they need to make another move, but you can't do that realistically. They actually should have hired Blake Anderson, the coach at Utah State, who proven as a head coach, knows what he's doing. He proved it again last season. They were lucky, but that you won the conference. So anyways, you know, what do they have at offense and defense? They have, coordinators. It's their first time in those roles before. So, we saw some regression. Hank Bachmeier, the quarterback, his QB plus is the 106 last season, which is really not that good for a program that's been as accomplished as Boise. The offense was actually 63rd. I had them in all of FBS, and based on the returning talent and the improvement metrics, I don't see a huge reason to expect improvement, especially given that it's not like they have an OC that's really proven himself elsewhere as a complete, turnaround guy. The defense actually was pretty good at a plus 3.0 rating, and their improvement metric is very high, so they should actually be among the most improved in FBS, which makes it sound like kind of a boring Iowa kind of team on blue turf. Not my cup of tea. I'm having a hard time with seeing all the optimism. Phil Steele actually has Boise winning the Mountain Division. Circus Sports, who I think is the sharpest book around, and we'll talk about them on the next pod, they opened them at plus 345 to win the Mountain West as the favorite. Now, there's been a lot of movement since, and we'll talk about that later in the week. But having them as the favorite, I think, was super optimistic. I didn't bet them under their total of 8.5 wins, but I'm not optimistic, short nor long term on Boise State until they get either their head coach proves himself or they bring in a proven guy.
Yeah, that that 345 to win the Mountain West, that does seem a little high and a little optimistic, I think. Um, Now, here's another interesting one in the Mountain West: Air Force. So this is a team that usually is kind of the laughing stock. Like, they're not particularly seen as a pretty high-powered program. I mean, they are a military college, but very strong last 2 years. They in, I think, 2021 they took down, it was Mike Leach in a bowl, I believe.
It was
And
the
then
Cardinals. It was Louisville.
Louisville, that's right. Yeah, they've had a good couple of years. Like 9-3 last season, not bad at all. Again, you're in the Mountain West, but not bad at all. Um, so basically, I kind of don't hate this. Like, I kind of like this team, honestly. I think this team could, like, this could kind of maybe be their year. If you're looking for a kind of team to impress in the Mountain West, I think this could be kind of one of the better teams in the Mountain West. What are your thoughts on them? Because this is a team that generally, like, whenever you look on the big board, you're like Air Force plus 3.5, and you're like, oh, should I bet that? Apparently, the answer is 9 of those times was yes. Um, and I think that's something I'm gonna look at a lot more this season. What are your thoughts on them?
Yeah, I had them as clearly the top team in the Mountain Division last season, even though obviously Utah State won the division. They go 9-3 in the regular season, and their three losses by a total of 17 points. Um, among those was a 7 point loss to Army, which I don't know, just shrug on that. What's really weird though is I was trying to figure this out, kind of what this means. So Air Force, the Air Force Academy didn't recognize the free COVID year, and I think because their scholarships or whatever the equivalent is at a military academy can't go that long. So for players to have a more quote normal experience, they had like 40 guys on their roster like leave school for the fall semester. And they got it back, in lieu of, that's what they did in lieu of the playing the free COVID year. They just sat out, just saying, I don't want to waste a season, on what they played like 5 games. Um, so they had like half their roster sat out the 2020 season. And what's interesting is it didn't really affect them in 2021. It's not like they had a slow start. Like, I think the only kind of weird parallel would be Old Dominion, who didn't play in 2020. And remember, Old Dominion, they started, I think, what was it, 1-5, or 1-6. They didn't have that. I mean, they were okay. They lost to Utah, or to Utah State in the third game of the season. Understandable. Conference champ, but otherwise they won, 6 of their first 7. So that's interesting. And what really is interesting to me is that you've almost got like a little bit of a miniature BYU situation here where you've got a military academy where they never have these older guys, and they're going to have basically half of your roster is going to be a year more mature than you otherwise would have. So not only were they good, you're going to have just kind of an unusually mature, not just experienced, but physically mature team for Air Force. Um, they're one of only 6 teams that have above average improvement metrics on both the offensive line and for the whole defense, which makes sense if you think that, you had so much of your roster just that didn't play. It's crazy though that they're going to be so much improved coming off a really solid season like that. Um, their quarterback kind of proves that option quarterbacks like to make like bend when it comes to statistics as relates to quarterback efficiency. He had a QB plus of 195, which is way, way, way high. It's crazy high. But that just shows that you're running the option right. If you're doing the option the right way, you're going to have incredible efficiency because you're bringing everybody up on the defense to stop the run, and then you get these wide open shock plays. Their defense actually had a second in the entire conference. They do lose the defensive coordinator to Virginia, but again, with all that experience, if that's going to be a problem, I don't think that's going to be a problem until later. Um, their season win total is 8.5, so I definitely again push people out of line to bet the over on that. What's interesting too is, and we'll get into this again later in the week, Circa opened them plus 410 to win the Mountain West, but that was fourth in the conference. So I bet them. I think that's the best value. I actually think that they have an outside shot at the G5 bid at the New Year's Six Bowl. I can see them very easily being that 11-1 or 12-0 team and really just, embarrassing a lot of teams this year. That option, when you do it right, it's really, really no fun. And kind of going back to the Stanford thing that we were discussing, they recruit a different kind of guy. They don't recruit as athletic, but man, if you do that option right, you just screw with the defense's mind and you can put up a lot of points in a short period of time.
That is a good point, right? If you can do the triple option well, that's all you need, right? And again, you're in the Mountain West. This isn't the Big Ten, right? So if you could do it well, and then that's what Air Force is able to do, like they can definitely do some damage. So yeah, I don't hate this team at all. We're gonna we're gonna have to see how this team does through the year, but I think this could definitely be a sleeper team. What 410 to win the Mountain 410 to win the Mountain West? Is that a conference or the division?
To win the conference.
That's definitely plausible. I think, but the only reason I'd hesitate on that is the next team we're going to talk about, which is
Yep.
Fresno State. So this is a team again. Last year was a really good team last year. Um, Somehow wasn't able to get to the Mountain West Championship. They kind of lost that. Yeah, because they lost at Hawaii somehow. Uh, but they had they crushed Boise and they were close against Oregon, but again lost to beat UCLA, but then they lost to Hawaii, right? So kind of really up or down. But I think this year they do have their quarterback does return, so I think this team could be actually pretty good this year. 8.5 season wins, that's not bad. I like. I'm honestly, I'm still really shocked that this team didn't win the Mountain West last year. Honestly, um, do you agree with me on that? Like, do you think this team should like this team? I believe is the favorite to win the Mountain West. Or no, they're not the favorite to win the Mountain West. Do you think this team should be the favorite to win the Mountain West?
Well, just to be technical, they didn't open as the favorite in the Mountain West, but we'll discuss that on later this week. I like them as well as Air Force. I was going to bet both of them just because I it was hard for me to really see anything but those two teams in the championship game. So I just figured just take half the payoff. We're covering more than half the possibilities. Um, I actually had them as the highest rated team in the Mountain West last season. And the top offense. Like you said, they lost to Oregon. They lost. They led for most of that game. They lost that one late, and then they beat UCLA just after UCLA had beaten LSU. And quite comedically, a idiot columnist out here had posited that when UCLA played Oregon, it would be for the national championship bid, which um, just proves that this guy doesn't really follow UCLA or Mario Cristobal. Anyways, so unfortunately, they lost Kalen DeBoer and the offensive coordinator, the defensive coordinator for Washington, like we talked about. But they do bring back Jeff Tedford, which who I think is not only underrated, but it's a good continuity hire because he was the coach before they brought in DeBoer. He had very good success here. And here's a crazy statistic about Jeff Tedford. From October 6th of 2003 through January 3rd of 2006, so that's about 27 months. Jeff Tedford was the only coach to beat USC, and he almost did it twice. I think he gets really overlooked because he had kind of a rough ending there at Cal, but the guy knows how to coach. And he proved when he was at Fresno last time, it's not like the game passed him by. Cal's not the easiest place to win, and I think he's proving that now. They have the highest rated drop back quarterback. I said that Hazik Daniels at Air Force kind of breaks all the records in that, but for drop back quarterbacks, Hainer is the top in the Mountain West. The returning talent on defense and on the offensive line are fine. Their season wins of 8.5 looks about right. They were 9-3 last season. I can tell you that as a USC fan, I am deathly afraid of hosting them in week 3. This would be one of the least surprising losses if USC lost that game. They opened up third to win the Mountain West Conference, but they're actually the favorite now. They've gotten bet down a lot. So I didn't bet them on that, but I think they've got a great shot to win the conference.
Yeah, I they probably should be right, and they have like, but the problem is though, are they going to lose randomly to like Hawaii? Right? That's the
Yeah.
question. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. Um, moving on to the team that also somehow didn't win the Mountain West last year, San Diego State. I believe they are the current favorite to win the Mountain West. Um, this team was like, I mean, no one really thought they were that like they were middling last year. Somehow 11-1 the next year after that. Um, Obviously, the biggest kind of prospect to leave San Diego State obviously is Matt Ariza, who is now on my Buffalo Bills. He had in the first week of the preseason, he had an 82-yard punt. He punted from the 18-yard line and then got a touchback. Which, like, at that point, it doesn't, like, people are like, oh, it's bad. It was a touchback. I'm like, no, that's amazing. Like, if you're backed up in your own end zone, you get a touchback, that's amazing. Like, that's, like, you flip the field, that's more than fine. But that's an absurd punt. I mean, sometimes if you're punting from your own 20, I've seen people get like usually the modal outcome if you're punting from your own like 20 or so is the opponent gets it on their own 40. He gets a touchback, push them at least another 20 yards back. Um, but just so I it's going to be an interesting year for this team. Again, the thing of it is, I do think that it's going to be hard, especially when you have a team that kind of like surges like that. It's generally hard for them to replicate it. So my like, initial instinct is to kind of dodge away from the San Diego State team, just because usually when you have a team that has this crazy breakout season, it just screams regression to the mean. So I'm kind of a little off this team. I don't think I'm gonna like this team that much this year. What do you think? I mean, obviously they hold a lot of their talent and they are getting a bit of a QB upgrade. But do you see this team as doing well this year, or do you kind of think that they were like a one shot wonder last year and then they're kind of done now?
Yeah, this is another one that I cut in line to bet against them. Even though they won the Western Division last year, I had them as third in the division behind Fresno and Nevada. Um, clearly what happened with Matt Ariza, this is interesting. Since my metrics just basically rate your offense and defense because it doesn't consider special teams to be especially repeatable. So there's no accounting for special teams, and that's why I show they had 2.8 games of good luck. Or it's basically you could say it's 2.8 games of Matt Ariza winning the game for them. K Ford actually has them even more extreme than me. He shows them regressing by 3.6 wins, which is his number one regression from last year to this year. Um, Here's what's crazy. When I use my post game win expectancy, just saying based on the offensive and defensive performances, who would you expect to win? So at San Jose State, they should have won 35% of the time. At Hawaii, 27%. Hawaii was just not just bad, but like so bad the coach got called to testify in front of the state senate. Um, they had a 9% win expectancy against Nevada. At UNLV, who won 2 games last year, their post game win expectancy was 29%. They won all 4 of those games. Um, I mean, those aren't close calls. They should have like got blown out with those win expectancies. So I think what happens is Matt Ariza is not going to be around to really paper over the horrible coach that is Brady Hoke. Um, I just think that the more Brady Hoke is there and the less Rocky Long influence is in that program, the worse and worse it's going to be. Like you mentioned, there is an upgrade at quarterback. They get Braxton Burmeister from Virginia Tech. I'm not a huge fan, but anytime you get a quarterback dropping from Power 5 to G5, it's going to be a help. They're going to have a problem on the offensive line, I think. They're going to be well below average in the returning starts, career starts, the improvement metric, and the number of starts that'll be in the prime of each kid's career. Um, and offensive line is one of those positions where you need to be really, technically sound, and that just doesn't kind of line up with the goofball that is Brady Hoke. The defense, like you said, should be fine. They return sufficient talent, but the problem is, what are they going to do without Matt Ariza to, to let them start at the opponent's 6 yard line every drive? That's not going to happen this year. Um, so the season win total, I showed it at 7.5 before I went to Vegas, and it was up to 8. So I did push people out of line to bet that one under. And what really informs that too is Arizona. They won 1 game last season. Arizona is only getting 5.5 or 6. I think they played them in week 1. Yeah, at San Diego State, opening up their new home stadium. That says a lot to me. The people that are betting on that week 1 game clearly don't see San Diego State as a team that's going to win 8 games unless they really see something super special in Arizona that just takes projection beyond what you or I could really comprehend. Um, Interesting that Circus Sports opened them as the second favorite in the Mountain West, and they're not that now.
Well, this is the thing, right? You talk about Matt Ariza kind of bailing them out, right? In college football, right? Usually offenses are better, but again, as you go down, as you go from Power 5 to G5, right? Offenses kind of get worse. And the thing of it is, when you have an amazing punter like Matariza who can barely, like, if you're backed up in your own zone and he's able to punt it 60, 70 yards, right? Push them back to their 20 or their 30, that's enough for you to get a stop and get the ball back, right? And again, now Matariza is going to be the punter for the Bills, which again, the Bills are an amazing team, one of the best offenses in the league, and it's a huge help to, like, it's a boost to them when Josh Allen trots out, like, say basically other team gets a touchdown, they punt it back to the Bills, or they kick off to the Bills, touchback, right? Josh Allen gets the ball to 20. They have a bad series. They go 3-and-out, right? Couple of drop, like a drop pass there, or maybe someone gets stopped on a run or something, right? Something bad happens. Oh well, now you're backed up a little bit. You're on your own 20. Great. He can now punt it, flip the field. You're good. But in
Yeah.
the past though, if you have just a regular punter there, then suddenly you're in a little bit of trouble, right? The other team's probably going to have a shorter field. They're maybe going to start on their own 40, maybe even the 50 if they get a good return, right? So you're in a little bit of trouble there if you're the Bills before. But now you have Matt Ariza. Now it's just great, right? Because the only one fundamental flaw you had was what happens if Josh Allen has a bad series. Again, one of the best quarterbacks in the league. Everybody has a bad series, right? Every quarterback. Patrick Mahomes sometimes goes 0-3 in a series, right? So it's good to have that kind of backup to help you, right? To get out of that sticky situation. But if if Matt Ariza is at San Diego State and he's constantly bailing them out of these horrible situations, and like they
Yeah.
rely on having to basically get the ball 60, 50, 60, 70-yard punts just to stay in games, because again they basically push them deep, get a stop on defense, then they get a short field to get back into these games. I mean, the thing is, those yards aren't even gained by the offense. They're basically gained by Matt Ariza. He's functionally your offense then.
Yeah.
Th- this is the problem, right? So, like, it's a huge difference when, like, the Bills get to be like, oh, well, we had a bad series. All right, Matt Ariza, go fix this, versus, like, well, we went 0-3 again. All right, Matt Ariza, go bail us out from our own 10-yard line, right? That's a huge difference there, right? And I think that's a huge difference, and I think we're really going to see that this year, and we're going to see if the San Diego State team actually has the firepower to actually be able to back that up, because and a lot of people won't necessarily notice this. 'Cause again, my model is equipped to notice it, but it's not set up for it yet. Because again, when like it does factor in punting and it does factor in average punting distance, so obviously it does like Matariza, but at the same time, though, other models they're probably not like, maybe they have some sort of factor ins for special teams, but when you really go play by play, only my model and a couple other ones are actually able to really factor in the difference that a longer punt makes. And I think
Hmm.
that's a really big difference. I think a lot of people are kind of underlooking. Maybe that's, I mean, the thing of it is, to be honest, Arizona, yeah, okay, maybe they could be on the upswing this year, but they're definitely not like an amazing team. And the fact that they're only a 5-point dog to basically a team that should have won the MAC last season, Mountain West last season, that's not great. And like,
Yeah.
again, like if they're plus 350 or basically favorites or co-favorites to win the Mountain West, and they're only a 5-point favorite against Arizona at home. I mean, yeah, okay, it's a short trip. I don't even, what is that, like, you could probably drive there. They probably aren't driving there, but you probably could
Well,
drive there.
Arizona doesn't travel. They don't bring any fans.
Yeah, that's the thing. So, like, I'm seriously, we'll see how week zero goes, but like that's seriously what I'm gonna look at for myself. But this is the thing: we're gonna know really soon whether or not this team is any good or not. And I think in that case, I think you really want that under eight. That's one of the one that's a bet I'm looking at too.
Yeah,
Um,
what's really crazy, just one other thing about that. I think you and I talked about this before. San Diego State had the second most punts in the entire country. And that's kind of a whatever, but if you think about it, like if you just have the mindset of if I just exchange punts, I'm going to gain 17 or 18 yards. I mean, that makes the game so much easier to manage too. It's just you're calling a totally different game when you don't have that. Just, we'll change, we'll just punt and then we'll pick up 18 yards and it's just, it's just kind of like a spider web of death. Not having that is just kind of just, man, I don't think it'd be overstated what a big difference that makes.
maybe that's why he's so good, because he had to punt so many times. His leg is just like so strong now just from punting. He's just like, I'm just gonna punt like 8 times in like 3 years. All right. Last but not least, well, there's a couple other teams in the Mountain West, but kind of last big one we want to highlight, UNLV. So not a banner year for UNLV last year at all. Second worst team in the Mountain West, but there was some nice things that happened to them last year. Like it wasn't completely bad. There was a couple of rate, like they were close in a couple of games. Couldn't
Mhm.
close them out though. But I don't think this team is completely doomed this year. I could see definitely some positive regression. Maybe we could see this team in a bowl this year. What do you think about that? Do you think we see this team in a bowl?
This is my Mountain West equivalent of the South Alabama Jaguars. I am so fired up for this team, and irrationally so, but that's what you and I do here. We champion the lower levels and we treat them like our favorite kid. Um, yeah, they were. I had them ninth in in the Mountain West in offense. I had them last in defense. Now, this is Arroyo's third season. He's really improved recruiting quite a bit from what he inherited. Just in case you didn't know, his predecessor was Tony Sanchez, who was the high school coach out there in Las Vegas for Bishop Gorman. There's a powerhouse program out there, and he was no good at UNLV, and I watched a lot of UNLV because it was an interesting story. So after he left, I still watched some UNLV ball, and right away UNLV just couldn't move the ball at all under Sanchez, and you could tell that they actually had an idea what they were trying to do in his first couple of years, Arroyos in 20 and 21. You could see that there were some plays that were working, but they had nobody that just could throw the freaking ball to anybody with any regularity. In 2020, his quarterback was Max Gilliam. He had a QB plus of 39, which would put him 13 points behind 2021's worst quarterback, Jack Plummer. And last year he got Cameron Friel up to a 69 QB plus, which is just still horrible. So we talked about it before when we were talking about Dana Dimmel, at now the UTEP coach. You see good coaches, they don't get a good shot until they get their quarterback. So this is what I love about UNLV. They go from Max Gilliam and Cameron Friel to your SEC quarterback with two last names, Harrison Bailey from Tennessee. He was a former five-star recruit. We've seen this move work before with formerly highly recruited guys going from Power Five to the Mountain West and tearing it up. Nick Starkel actually won the Mountain West in 2020. I don't know for sure, but I'm pretty sure he was offensive player of the year in the Mountain West that season. He came from, I think it was at both A&M and Arkansas. Jake Hayner, who we have talked about a lot, he actually did the same move from Washington to Fresno State and has been the best drop back quarterback the last couple of years there. I think you're going to see a huge step up in the offense because you would just see plays where it's like, my gosh, if anybody could throw the ball, they have plays that are working, except for the ball's not being put in the right spot. Now the ball's going to be put in the right spot a lot more frequently. I think that helps the defense too. Um, their defense was horrible, like I said. They actually get a new defensive coordinator, Keith Hayward. He's been on the Pac-12 for a while. I think he's a good recruiter. The thing is, he's been at Cal for a while, coaching, I think, the linebackers under Justin Wilcox. Justin Wilcox is probably the best defensive coach, except for Whittingham in the Pac-12. Very good guy to learn under. So I think that is a great steal. It's not a typical cheap lower level program where you are moving up a G5 position coach. You're moving up a legitimate Power 5 position coach. Uh, so I think there's a lot of reason to be optimistic on both sides of the ball. This is crazy. They have six starters returning um, on defense. Each of these six guys, every start last season was of the first 13 of their career. So everybody that returns was going straight up the learning curve last year. And now they get somebody who actually learned under a very good defensive coach. I think that there's reason to expect the defense to make a big step up this season. Also, making it even better, they had bad luck. I had them with bad luck of 1.8 games. K Ford is showing 2.5 wins better. So I went way over the season total of 4. Um, I think they make it pretty easily. I think they can actually make a bowl this season. And I think I'm one of the few people that feels that way because it was bet down from 4.5 before I got there to 4.
That's that's pretty fair. Yeah, it's a good case for them. I like it. I think give us with the UNLV Rebels or no? No,
Yeah.
no. Yeah, they are the
Yeah.
Rebels, right? I think so. Yeah.
Did I do this? I talked you into this one like UTEP.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's go. Let's go. Well, it's they're the Rebels, but their mascot's like a hawk, I think. Or am I thinking someone else? I can't remember. Um, but yeah, no, like yeah, let's go. Let's go UNLV. I mean, again, this is a team that usually plays late at night, so you get to if you get like a fun over bet all season, then you're like you get to like watch like them grind out against like some random team at like 11 o'clock on a Friday. So yeah, that seems pretty fun. All right. Last but not least, the last two teams in the Mountain West, Colorado State and kind of Nevada here. Nevada. Wow. That's what we're gonna talk about. Um, I mean, we'll talk about week 0 next week. Actually, fine. I won't say Nevada is playing next week. I wonder how I've bet in that game. But no, we'll talk about them next week. But again, like they played in the bowl, and Carson Strong was out of the bowl because he was trying to get drafted. That did not work. But that was really bad. Like they had a really tall guy, and that was not fun. That was really not good. Um, and then Colorado State, not a great year last year, but I definitely think they could definitely bounce back. Like they definitely had a bunch of like bad things happen to them, and definitely a lot of bad luck. I think they could definitely turn it around this year. What do you think? Do you kind of see these teams as like? I mean, we talked about this before, right? We talked about um, kind of Arizona State. I mean, obviously, actually, no, Nevada. No, Nevada does not border Colorado. I'm thinking Utah. But no, they don't exactly border each other. But I mean, I kind of see these two programs as kind of going in opposite directions. Nevada's usually people randomly like Nevada, but I don't think they're going to be a particularly good team this year. What do you think?
Yeah, I think they're just in totally different. They're starting from different spots, but they're looking at totally different trajectories. I kind of see this big bus that Jay Norvell filled up with his favorite guys from Reno and said, "Hey, let's go to Colorado State." He actually brought, from what I've read, 11 transfers from his Nevada team to Colorado State, which is crazy. Um, the Colorado State has a huge upgrade from Steve Adazio to Jay Norvell. Jay Norvell is one of the most underappreciated head coaches. Steve Adazio is one of the biggest bozos. They actually had Colorado State had 2.7 games of bad luck last season, which I think is probably 3 games of horrible coaching decisions at the end of the game, and point 0.3 good luck. K Ford affirms that with 2.5 more wins this season. So I don't know how much they're going to improve immediately because that is just kind of a blood transfusion. And I think it takes the body a little time to assimilate the new blood. But I think by the end of the season, this will be a good team. One of the 11 transfers is actually a quarterback. Hopefully, it wasn't the giant guy that stunk. Hopefully, it was somebody more athletic. Um, but I think there's going to be big improvement for Colorado State. Nevada is just on the other side of that. They're losing those 11 kids. They lose Carson Strong, as you said. Um, they actually K Ford. I didn't show them as good luck, but K Ford shows them regressing by 3 wins, probably with Strong leaving and Norvell leaving. They did the typical small cheap school. I think they care about basketball more than football there. They went from Norvell to Ken Wilson, who's been an assistant forever. He coached at Nevada long ago, so he's familiar. He's probably cheap. He'll do it for a small check. He brought in two first-time coordinators for offense and defense. I just maybe it works out long term, but I think in the near term, it's a year zero situation for a team that went 8-4 last season and was really good. So Colorado State thumbs up, Nevada thumbs down.
Yeah, that's fair for me. I think we're gonna kind of leave it there because we're probably gonna talk more about this Nevada team next week when we talk about they're one of the like 6 week 0 games that actually exist for us to talk about next week. Um, so yeah, we'll be back next week. Well, actually, I keep saying next
Later
week.
this week.
That's literally yeah. Like these games are happening like hours. Well, not hours from now. Days from now. This is Sunday night. Nevada plays at well my time at least. They play at 10 o'clock on Saturday night. That is 7 o'clock for you. That's what serves as a late game. but yeah, that game is happening, and we're recording this on Monday. So this is happening literally just like 6 days from now. College
Yep.
football's back. We get a noon game in Dublin for some reason between Northwestern and Nebraska that no one asked for, but here we are. And then we have some other games too. So yeah, I'm pretty excited for this. But we're gonna come back next or later this week. We're gonna talk about week zero. Obviously, and then we're gonna give USC the full time it takes. Obviously, you're a big USC fan, and obviously they're one of the bigger storylines of this season, right? Obviously, brand new head. They stole. I mean, I think we could probably say stole is the right adjective. Stole Lincoln Riley from Oklahoma. Maybe willingly stole, but they were still. It was still a steal. Um, then they stole most of Oklahoma's offense as well, and other pieces too. So, but no, like they're a really big storyline this season, and they're gonna get a lot of media attention, and deservedly so. I mean, USC might. I mean, if not this year, maybe next year. Like this is gonna be a good program. Maybe not this year, but I think definitely in a couple of years. I mean, we're gonna be talking about USC as potential big like you when I mean actually yeah USC is only what 2 years away from being in the Big 12. Like like if they actually somehow if they put them in the Big 12 West, which I don't think they can, or the Big 10 West, which I don't think they can actually, because like they'd probably be like okay if they were in the Big 10 West right now, would they be favorites or not?
This season, no. It's
No.
a bad matchup for them because everybody in that division would just punch them in the mouth. They'd probably outscore some of them. It would probably come down to really brutal home road splits where they maybe win one road game and they maybe lose one home game in conference.
But you think they'll grow into it by the time they go? They'll be ready to beat Wisconsin and Iowa and
I would like one more season of runway. It's weird to be ready for that, but on the other hand, I want to see those games. I think they're going to be really fun games to see conference games in those awesome Big Ten venues. I did profess my love for the Big 12 or the Big Ten West in our first podcast this preseason. I genuinely love it. I would love to see them play in that Western division. That would be really fun. This is assuming they keep divisions. Those would be some great road trips.
yeah, I mean Iowa. I mean again, it's gonna be an amazing sight to see. You see that they're red in the yellow of Iowa, and USC should start getting some linebackers now. Just start adding random linebackers. They're gonna need them.
Yeah.
Um, but no, it's gonna be like again, we're still a couple years out from that, but that's gonna be really exciting. I'm looking forward to seeing USC in the Big Ten. Honestly, they deserve to be there on it. It's one of the premier conferences, and they're one of the premier teams, and I think it's going to be fascinating to see them in prime time against Ohio State and destroying Penn State, and yeah, it's gonna be really interesting. So all right, that does it for today's podcast. We'll see you later this week talking about week zero. Finally, football is well, it's actually preseason football isn't really football, but it's very soon now. We're very soon to football.